Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Former Commons Speaker John Bercow has been found to be a serial bully by an independent inquiry. We'll have the reaction from Westminster. As war in Ukraine continues to escalate, we'll bring you the latest developments as almost 2 million people flee for their lives. And on International Women's Day, I'll be talking with 2 women MPs about why much more needs to be done for women to feel safe. First, it's the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It is 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie, right here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, Ukraine has announced that the first civilian evacuation corridors have opened from the cities of Sumy and Irpin. But the country's foreign ministry claims Russian forces are shelling one evacuation route from Mariupol. Previous attempts at allowing citizens to leave some cities have failed. Both sides have accused each other of breaking the ceasefire agreements. The UNHCR estimates the number of refugees leaving the country has now reached 2 million people. The head of NATO has warned Russia the targeting of civilians is a war crime and cautioned the situation could spiral out of control. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also rejected Russian proposals to evacuate citizens into what he's described as occupied territory in Russia and Belarus.
Occupants have again bombarded Sumy with air bombs. It is our peaceful city which has never, throughout its history, posed any kind of threat to Russia. The kind, quiet and lovely Sumy region which is being turned into hell. Mariupol, a peaceful and hard-working city which has no anger, was encircled and blocked.
Well, meanwhile, President Zelensky is expected to address MPs in the House of Commons at 5 p.m. today. That's going to be the first time that a president of another country has addressed the main Westminster chamber. Zelensky's spoken to Boris Johnson on a nearly daily basis since Russia invaded Ukraine, and he's made a number of speeches to Western leaders in the last week asking for supplies and military support. The boss of Shell has apologised after his company bought a shipment of Russian oil last week. The organisation said it would withdraw from purchasing Russian oil in the future, and it's going to shut petrol stations in the country. It comes as drivers have been hit by the biggest weekly hike in fuel prices in at least 18 years due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Figures from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy show the average price of a litre of petrol rose by 3 pence in the week to Monday, hitting close to 153 pence per litre. Diesel also saw a 5 pence increase on the week. Now, there's a warning that employees in Britain could be facing the sharpest decline in real income since the 70s. Think tank The Resolution Foundation estimates a fall of £1,000 for each household. That's a scale of decline which would normally be associated with recession. Their report says the crisis in Ukraine has increased both the scale of price rises and also the degree of uncertainty. The independent expert panel which investigated the former Commons Speaker John Bercow has found he was a serial bully. They recommend he should never be allowed a parliamentary pass again. The report accused Mr Bercow, who was Speaker of the House for 10 years, of behaviour that fell below what would be expected. In response, Mr Bercow described the investigation as a travesty of justice and amateurish. The Health Secretary is expected to give people more control over their treatment under plans to reform the NHS. Well, they include expansion of personal care and a bigger role for the NHS app. The NHS aims to have 75% of adults using the app by 2024. That should make it easier for people to book appointments and see their test results. Patients will also be given more choices if waiting times are too long. In Australia, tens of thousands of residents in Sydney have fled their homes overnight as severe flooding continues across the country's east border. This follows a record downpour that's hit parts of Queensland and New South Wales over recent weeks, cutting off towns and sweeping away farms and roads. 19 people have been killed since the floods began. School leaders are warning there's still a very long way to go to tackle the pay difference between male and female head teachers. The National Head Teacher Union says the difference between male and female head teachers' average pay across all state-funded nursery and primary schools has increased by nearly £1,000. Well, the Shadow Women and Equalities Secretary, Annalise Dodds, told us the disparity is appalling.
One of the reasons why we think there's that disparity is because although you can compare salaries currently within a company, so women can see if they're paid within the company they work for the same as men, you can't actually compare them across organisations. And that creates big problems when, for example, you've only got one person at the top of an organisation, like a head teacher.
You're up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, let's head to Gloria for this lunchtime's briefing.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing. In the last hour, former Commons Speaker John Bercow has been found by an inquiry to be a serial bully. I'll bring you the reaction from Westminster. Almost 2 million Ukrainians have fled the war. We'll bring you the latest on the situation. And it's International Women's Day. I'll be talking to 2 women MPs about improving everything from safety to representation in politics. And my Real Me interview is with Dr. Luke Evans MP. He's passionate about controlling the misleading images of perfect bodies that we see online. We're nearly 2 weeks into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. This afternoon at 5 p.m, Ukrainian President Zelensky will address the House of Commons. Meanwhile, the situation for civilians on the ground seems ever more desperate. Joining me now is Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Mark, good to see you. A big blow to Russian forces today.
Well, yes, very potentially, with claims that another very senior member of the Russian military has been killed by Ukrainian forces. Now, this is Major General Vitaly Gerasimov, one of 2 major generals killed in recent days, along with Major General Andrei Sukovsky. You can see their short biographies up there. Major General Gerasimov was 45. He was the first deputy commander of 41st Army of the Central Military District of Russia, decorated for his actions during the Chechen War, the Syrian conflict and the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Now, I say was. He is reported by the Ukrainian military to have been killed in fighting around Kharkiv, along with some other senior Russian military officers. It's not been confirmed officially by the Russian government as yet, or Russian media, but the investigative news organisation Bellingcat has spoken to Russian sources who have confirmed that this is the case. The other Major General, Andrei Sukovsky, aged 47, was a commanding general of the Russian 7th Airborne Division. Again, he's been decorated for combat in Crimea and Syria. Russian media confirmed that he was killed by a sniper, apparently, in Mariupol just last week. Now, I think, we can't underestimate just how very significant this is to have senior officers of this rank killed just in a matter of days of each other, when things have slowed down very significantly in terms of the Russian advance. Of course, a key Russian objective is always to encircle centres of population and to open fire with artillery, missiles and alike and try to pummel the population into submission. But any move on Kiev appears for the time being to have stalled, although there is a suggestion that some of the forces to the east and the north are regrouping with a view perhaps to move on Kiev in the coming days. So, as I say, the death of these two generals, I think very significant if that latest general, Gerasimov, if that is confirmed to be the case.
Really significant. Also, our Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has been doing a media round this morning. What's your big takeaway from what he had to say?
Well, he's spoken on this issue, a very complex and difficult issue about whether NATO countries supply the Ukrainians as they want with fighter jets. Now, the only country really that's in a position to do that in any meaningful way is Poland. And that is because, as you can see on the screen, I'll describe it for our radio listeners, this is a MiG-29 fighter jet, obviously Russian design, but just a handful of NATO countries in the east of the NATO's flank still have them in their inventory, including Poland. And the reason they're important is because Ukraine has MiG fighters, so it's about the only jet fighter they are trained in to be able to use. There's no point giving them US-made F-16s or UK F-35s, for instance. They need these MiG fighters. Poland is considering a request by Vladimir Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, who's desperate for any of these fighters that he can get. The US have said that if Poland do supply them with these MiG fighters, then they'll give them F-16s, Poland F-16s, to supplement the numbers that they're giving away. However, there's a real difficult choice for Poland to be made here, because that could put them potentially in direct line of hostility with Russia. Vladimir Putin has already said that any country that gives the likes of military jets to Ukraine would be seen as directly a direct hostile act towards the Russian government. So some calculations to be made, but it may be Ben Wallace giving his support to the idea that if Poland did that, it would be something that he would support and the UK government would support as well.
Fascinating. Thanks so much, Mark White, our security editor, for the update. Now, in the last hour, former House of Commons Speaker John Bercow has been described by a serial bully by an independent inquiry and has been banned from ever holding a parliamentary pass for the parliamentary estate. We will be talking to Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, who is in Downing Street. He'll bring us the latest shortly. Coming up, we'll be speaking to Shadow Justice Minister Ellie Reeves and what the government has to do to improve rape conviction rates. Before that, it's a break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. This war has not only created a humanitarian crisis, but a cost of living crisis too. While the West ponders a ban on Russian oil exports, Russia has also threatened to cut off the gas supply. Gas prices hit new highs. Oil is going up. Could soon be a spike in food costs too. Joining me to explain it all is Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Just tell us, Liam, about these energy wars between the West and Russia and what it means for us.
Well, I don't want to be alarmist about this, Gloria, but even during the bad old days of the Cold War, the Soviet Union continuously and reliably pumped gas to Western Europe. That's now under threat. We learnt over the weekend that the US Congress was debating a draft bill to sanction Russian gas on Western markets, to block the Russians selling oil on Western markets. And the Russians have said, OK, if you block us our oil, we're going to stop sending gas, particularly through that Nord Stream pipeline from Russia to Germany that we've heard so much about in recent days. We shouldn't get confused. There are two Nord Stream pipelines. They lay next to one another. Nord Stream 1's been pumping gas from Russia to Germany since 2011. Nord Stream 2 is the one that Germany has blocked the opening of. But Nord Stream 1 is still pumping. So the Western world, we want one of the gas pipelines from Russia to keep going, but we want to show that we're, backing Ukraine. So we want the other gas pipeline from Russia to Germany to not pump gas. The implications of all this is pretty worrying. Viewers will also already know, if they've been filling up their cars and vans in the last couple of days, petrol has gone way above 150, 160, 170 to the litre of both petrol and diesel in some parts of the UK. But gas prices this morning have also spiralled. Of course, there's a cap for households on their gas bills. We know that cap is going up sharply in April. If these high prices continue, if this energy standoff between Russia and the West continues, that cap's going to have to go up even more.
That's really worrying. And briefly, if you would, just tell us how worried we should be about food prices too.
Well, food prices, I hear politicians say on GB News all the time, the Russian economy is small, etc. When it comes to fuel and food, Russia is an exporting superpower. When it comes to industrial metals, Russia is an exporting superpower. We need to be honest with people about that. Russia's the world's biggest wheat exporter. A lot of Russian wheat, corn, barley, maize comes out through Ukraine into the Black Sea, the Odessa grain funnel, those Black Sea ports. None of those exports are now happening, and that means that food prices are going up. Just this morning, Gloria, the head of the World Food Programme, which is a very highly respected charity that monitors food trends around the world, he talked of a perfect storm in terms of food prices. So again, these are spikes in global markets. Spikes can be reversed and they can come back. But if these prices remain elevated for much longer, we will feel the implications in the shops.
Thank you, Liam. We'll be talking about this much, much more, and of course on your show at 1 o'clock. Today, we celebrate International Women's Day. Conservative MP Maria Miller will lead a debate in the House of Commons on Thursday. I'm delighted that she joins me now from Westminster. Maria, good to see you.
Hello.
First of all, could I just get your reaction to the news about former Speaker John Bercow, serial bully of House of Commons staff who will not be allowed a parliamentary security pass? Your reaction to that, please.
Well, obviously, these decisions are made by the Standards Committee, and it will be as a result of the allegations and then the investigation into issues around bullying and harassment. So that will be the reason why a pass hasn't been issued. And these decisions are not taken lightly. So it will have been a thorough investigation. It's always sad when that happens, but I can understand why the decision's been taken.
Now, the mother of all parliaments, 65% male. And that's largely because your own party doesn't have enough women MPs. What more can be done?
Oh, well, this International Women's Day, amongst many other things, I'm calling on Parliament and the political parties to make sure that we've got equal representation for women. Different political parties have taken different routes to achieve that, and certainly the Conservative Party, my party, has to do an awful lot more, and that's why we're focusing in on recruitment of women into Parliament. And in fact, I'm hosting an event today supported by Lloyds Bank and the Fawcett Society and UN Women across parties to encourage more women to think about standing for election. But I also think that Parliament itself has to think about how it can make itself more attractive to women as a workplace. And we know that many women, around 3/4 of women, simply would not consider standing for election because of issues around online harassment and bullying, not in Parliament, but more generally through social media. So we have to address these issues in the round. It's not only for political parties, it's for Parliament itself, and indeed the government through legislation such as the Online Safety Bill to really tackle these things and change women's views of Parliament.
Indeed. Now, let's have a look at the executive, the government departments, 4 government departments which don't have a single woman in them. Many more, mostly made up of men. In fact, only 4 government departments have 50% women. Is the Prime Minister sexist?
I think this reflects the fact that in my party, as you've already set out, we simply don't have enough women. And in fact, I'm just about to go into a meeting where we have many Conservative women from the Conservative Women's Organisation, meeting with Victoria Atkins and the chairman of the party, amongst other organisational groups, to talk about how we can get more women involved in not just political life, but in public office. Now, we know that the Labour Party have used all-women shortlists to get to the place they are now, which is 50% women in Parliament. 50% of their MPs are women. But obviously, they're not going to be using that tool at the next election, and they're concerned about how that will leave their party. So I believe more than ever we need to look at the culture and the appeal of Parliament as a working place for women, because if we don't tackle that, we won't tackle the disparity between men and women in Parliament. We have double the number of men in Parliament than women, and then we won't tackle the issue that you've just outlined, which is the lack of women coming through to take those important ministerial positions.
Let's look at the situation in the Ukraine. The majority of the 1.7 million people who have fled Ukraine are women and children. The government has faced criticism that as a country we're not doing enough to help desperate people to be able to come to the UK. Do you believe that criticism is fair?
Look, it's International Women's Day, and I'd like to start by paying tribute to all of those Ukrainian women, and indeed the women in Russia as well, who would normally have International Women's Day as a bank holiday, as a day off, a day to celebrate. And this year, we can't be further from that truth, and indeed not just in Ukraine, but in Afghanistan as well. So we have to make sure that we're supporting the Ukraine people, but particularly those women, children and older people who are fleeing the country. I mean, our government is the first to set up a visa scheme for people who are fleeing Ukraine to be able to apply to come into our country. And it's not only for family members, but a humanitarian visa scheme. So, the government has put, £400 million of money into supporting the people of Ukraine. But you're right, we have to be challenging and scrutinising how we can work harder and faster to make sure that those people who do want to come to the UK, which of course many are choosing to go to other countries as well, but those who want to come to the UK can come here as quickly as possible.
Maria Miller, it's always good to have you on the show. We appreciate your time. Happy International Women's Day to you. Thank you. Now, conviction rates for rape are at an all-time low. The Labour Party has a debate in the House of Commons this afternoon calling for action on improving those conviction rates. Joining me now in the studio is Ellie Reeves, the Shadow Justice Minister. Ellie Reeves, can I start by asking you for your reaction to the news that the former Speaker, John Bercow, was a serial bully of House of Commons staff?
Well, the news is really worrying. Before I went into Parliament, I was an employment rights lawyer for over a decade, and I stand firm against any bullying and harassment in the workplace. It just shouldn't happen, and the Labour Party have a zero tolerance policy towards it. So it's really disappointing to read the news this morning.
Now, let's look at some figures on rape cases. They're astonishing. I always think they're wrong when I write them down. Yeah. But I read your piece this morning. Just 1.3% of rape cases are prosecuted, despite the number of rapes reported to the police being at record highs. Isn't that the fault of the Crown Prosecution Service rather than the government?
Look, I mean, it's a truly shocking statistic that it is deeply concerning. Thinking about the Crown Prosecution Service, I mean, they lost a third of their staff between 2010 and 2019 under this government, and that will play a part in all of this. But also, when I speak to victims, what they say is that they don't feel the system is working for them. They don't feel that the criminal justice system is working for them. They feel as though it's working against them. And even those cases that are being prosecuted, because of the court backlog caused by this government, victims are waiting over 1,000 days before their cases get to court. That's more than 3 years for their case to go to trial, and they feel unsupported during that process. And it's got to be reformed. It's got to be changed.
And the Labour Party are holding a debate this afternoon because you have control of the agenda once a week. What are you calling for? What would Labour do?
Well, there's a number of things, and we've set out a survivors support package for victims of rape and serious sexual violence. So there's a number of things we're calling for. First of all, legal advocates for victims of rape, so that there is someone with them every step of the way, from reporting crime at the police station right through to trial. Enabling rape victims to give their evidence pre-recorded and be cross-examined pre-recorded, so they're not waiting years and reliving the trauma and the stress. And then we're saying to the government, look, you need to carry out an urgent review into setting up specialist rape courts to fast-track these cases through the system. And at the end of all of that, we've got to show the seriousness of this crime by introducing minimum sentences for rape, because there aren't minimum sentences for rape at the moment.
And now, I mean, you're right, which is also shocking. You're suggesting a new statutory minimum sentence of 7 years to better reflect the seriousness of the crime. 7 years doesn't sound like that much.
Well, look, the reality is at the moment, if you look at the guidelines for sentencing, the starting point is just 5 years, and that's not even a statutory minimum. That's a guide. But very often it gets reduced down from 5 years. So, we hear of cases that are referred to the unduly lenient sentences scheme, where people have been given sentences of 2 to 5 years for rapes. I mean, these are incredibly serious crimes. Lives are destroyed because of them. At the moment, there's no minimum at all. So, by setting a minimum sentence, it sets a clear message that things need to change, and we're tackling the issue of rape.
Let's talk about flashing. Indecent exposure is the formal term. New figures out suggesting that women and girls are flashed at more than 200 times a week. And there's evidence that people who start with flashing go on to commit more serious crimes. Do we take flashing, I mean, sometimes it's called sort of low level, but should we take that much more seriously and nip it in the bud? And how do we do that?
Absolutely, it needs to be taken much more seriously. And we know that, sometimes things start with this type of offending and then moves on to much serious offending. So I think it's absolutely wrong to call it low-level offending. Let's call it what it is. It's violence against women and girls. It's harassment. It needs to stop, and we need to be firm and say, actually, we need to look at this and make sure it's stamped out.
I just want to return to the case of John Bercow, because, of course, he's a member of the Labour Party. He joined the Labour Party, didn't he, recently? Will you be looking into whether he should be a member of the Labour Party, given that he is a serial bully, according to this independent inquiry?
Well, I am sure that the Labour Party will be looking at this and looking at it very closely. Obviously, the news has come out today, the inquiries come out today, but we do have a zero tolerance policy towards bullying and harassment.
So that would suggest he might have to go. Can I just ask you one question, just to go back to Flashing? Have you ever been subject to street harassment yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I have actually, Gloria. I mean, I can remember once. In my early 20s, walking to the train station one morning, broad daylight in the morning, and a young man, younger than I was, stopped me and asked for the time. And I gave him the time, and then he touched my behind. Broad daylight, walking to the station, going to work.
I mean, I have a very similar experience walking to work, broad daylight, in my 20s, and someone exposed themselves to me.
It's just dreadful.
Astonishing. Ellie Reeves, thank you for coming to the studio today. Thank you. Happy
Thank
International
you.
Women's Day to you, I should say. I wish Miriam Miller the same. Former Commons Speaker John Bercow has been found to be a serial bully. We'll have the reaction from Westminster right after the news.
It's 12:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. Now, the Ukraine Foreign Ministry claims Russian forces are shelling humanitarian evacuation routes from Mariupol after ceasefires have been put in place across a number of cities. The governor of the northeastern city of Sumy had said the ceasefire has largely held in his city. That's allowed thousands to leave. Previous attempts at letting citizens to leave have failed, with both sides accusing each other of breaking the ceasefire agreements. The UNHCR estimates the number of refugees leaving the country has now reached 2 million people. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to address MPs in the House of Commons at 5 o'clock today. It's going to be the first time a president of another country has addressed the chamber. Zelensky, who's spoken to Boris Johnson on a near-daily basis since Russia invaded, has made a number of speeches to Western leaders in the last week, asking for military support and supplies. Now, the boss of Shell has apologised after his company bought a shipment of Russian oil last week. The organisation said it would withdraw from purchasing Russian oil in the future, and it's going to shut petrol stations in the country. Well, it comes as drivers have been hit by the biggest weekly hike in fuel prices in at least 18 years, due, of course, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, there's a warning that employees in Britain could be facing the sharpest decline in real income since the 70s. Think tank The Resolution Foundation estimates a fall of £1,000 each for each household. That's a scale of decline we'd normally associate with recession. The report says the crisis in Ukraine has increased both the scale of the price rises and the degree of uncertainty. In some other news now, the independent expert panel that investigated the former Commons Speaker John Bercow has found he was a serial bully and recommends he should never be allowed a parliamentary pass again. The report accused Mr Bercow, who was Speaker of the House for 10 years, of behaviour that fell below what would be expected. In response, Mr Bercow described the investigation as a travesty of justice and said it was amateurish. You're now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. The Briefing with Gloria will be back shortly.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows. Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
In the last hour, former House of Commons Speaker John Bercow has been described as a serial bully by an independent inquiry and has been banned from ever holding a pass to the parliamentary estate. Tom Howard, our political correspondent, is in Downing Street with the latest. Tom, are you shocked by this?
Well, some people may be shocked. However, others who have been following this investigation for the years in which it has been going on may not be that shocked at all, because, of course, these allegations first surfaced years ago while John Bercow was still Speaker of the House of Commons. The fact that it has taken until today to finally conclude this investigation and force any sanction to be brought against the former Speaker, to many will raise eyebrows. Of course, there have been a number of allegations as to how he spoke to his staff, how he spoke to people he viewed as inferior to him. He's been alleged to have been some sort of Jekyll and Hyde character as he conducted his over a decade in the Speaker's chair. It's an incredibly powerful position in Parliament, of course. Some call it the Prince of Parliament. The Speaker controls what goes on in the chamber of the House of Commons, and that can have a huge effect over our politics. So the fact it has taken this long to find this conclusion will, for many people, be slightly concerning, but for others it will be a relief that this is coming to the fore now. And I have to just add that the former Speaker John Bercow's response to this investigation has been fairly extraordinary, almost gloating in one comment, saying while he may have been banned from obtaining a ex-member's pass, he will still be able to visit the House of Commons if invited by a member, almost repudiating what the House of Commons investigation said there. Some pretty extraordinary comments from former Speaker John Bercow.
Certainly were. Tom Howard, as ever, thank you. Now, later today, MPs on the Health Select Committee are launching an inquiry into body image. I spoke to Dr. Luke Evans about why he's trying to change the law on digitally altered images online. It's one of my series of Real Me interviews where we try to find out about the person as well as the politics. Luke Evans, so you had a comfortable upbringing.
Well, my father's a GP, my mum's a nurse and was a school nurse. I was very lucky with the opportunities I was given. My parents have always been sort of aspirational, and their big drive has been around education and getting my two brothers, three of us, into doing as best as we ever could. It did make tough times. We had to remortgage our house at one stage to be able to pay school fees because things were tough. They got some bad advice. And, that made things difficult. But broadly speaking, I've been very lucky. If I was lucky to give my kids the upbringing that I've had, then fantastic.
And tell us about the career that you pursue after university.
So my university, I studied medicine in Birmingham and, thoroughly enjoyed it. And then 2008, 2009, I'd always been interested in being in A&E, possibly, looking at that, but then got into the idea of medical leadership and making a little bit of a difference from that side. Politics had never been a thought that I'd ever have. I ended up actually getting unwell in 2009. I ended up having appendicitis and ended up on intensive care units because I got bilateral pneumonia. Only a medic would have the complications that we did. So that makes you think and say, well, nothing profound, but what can I do to make a bit of a difference? So I did my second year, and then thought I got onto the GP training around Birmingham, but thought, am I sure I want to do this? So took a year out to do anatomy demonstrating, teach medical students, first and second year medical students in Birmingham. And that's when I got the interest in politics, because I was watching what was going on with an election and thinking, well, I do a lot in the community, I'm interested in that kind of side of things. How do I swap that over? Maybe it's something I'll explore. And then GP came up and I thought, that's the right thing for me. So I spent 3 years doing my GP training and then qualified from there, and then have worked in multiple practices, both some as a locum and then some as a salaried doctor, all across the Midlands, towards Oxford as well, and then even where I work, where I work now as an MP. So that's sort of the history of where I've got to.
Does the way that our GP service works, is it broadly right? Did you learn things about how our GP are providing our GP services, where you thought, wonder if we could do better on X or Y?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think probably go back further than that. As a junior doctor was the real interest. One of the reasons I was in politics was because I was always the person as a junior doctor who said, well, why do we do this? And the NHS would say to you, well, you're too junior to ask that question. We've always done it like that. Or what do you know? And you said, well, hang on, if I'm on the front line, the consultant's not going to know what's happening. Maybe we can make a change and a little bit of difference. So some people put their head down. I was always the one who said, well, that doesn't make sense. Can we do something about it? So yes, it gives you that insight. And I think going forward, that's really handy, especially when we've dealt with the pandemic, because you're able to offer some of the solutions or see some of the problems that you won't see in Westminster or Whitehall, because you know how the coalface works. And that's really, really important to be able to say, there's a balance here, or there's a trade-off, what are you looking at? So the classic example at the moment is face-to-face interview, seeing a GP face-to-face. And the question you have to ask is it appropriate, and appropriate to who? So it might well be that you've got a smartphone and you say, I've got a skin lesion. It's absolutely appropriate for me to say, would you take a photo of it, send me in? Actually, no, this is clearly a mole, I'm not worried, or I'm not sure, come in and see me about it. But that's a change from what patients are used to. So they may be upset saying, I'd like to come in and see my GP. So you're caught between what's right for the NHS and prioritising over the clinical need versus what's right for the consumer, i.e. the patient, and their right to have a standard of service. And that's a real constant rub, especially as we live in a society that demands more and more, but also is worried about how much they're paying for their taxes. So it's quite a hard balance to strike. And that's what you're seeing play out in the media with GPs, government, being an MP, and also the public as well. So it's quite an interesting battle. And
I suppose lots of people will be watching thinking, why is it that you have to ring at 8 o'clock in the flipping morning? Do you know, was there anything, these are things that probably strike patients, but is there anything in particular that struck you about the way that just we all use our GP service where you thought,
yes,
might be able to work better?
I guess there's a variety, and it's really interesting. Different practices find different ways of doing things. And the best thing about general practice is patients learn as well. So you'll put a new model in of saying, let's say, okay, we'll move from phoning up to have a walk-in clinic, which works really well for the first 3 or 4 months. But then patients start going, well, instead if I ring up, if I just walk in, I can get my appointment and get seen there. And suddenly you get more and more people turning up and walking in. So then you have to move your resources around. And this is the hard thing to explain to people in Westminster, is actually, it's not like a commodity of moving a box. Patients all respond differently. So you and I could both go into hospital with the same problem, appendicitis. You have a fantastic time out within 24 hours. I end up with bilateral pneumonia and end up on intensive care unit. And there's no rhyme or reason why that happens. And that's the biggest frustration for me in the NHS is some people will go in with the same problem and have Rolls-Royce care, and others will not have problems along the way. And why is there that inconsistency when you're going to the same place? And that's the key thing to try and pull out and tease out.
How touch and go was it for you when you were in intensive care?
I never thought I was going to die or anything like that. But it's quite unusual, let's put it this way, to have bilateral pneumonia as 27. So I was in the intensive care unit for about 48 hours. I was in hospital for about 10 days and then off for a month or so afterwards, because all the antibiotics and things they gave you cause bowel problems as well. There's something called pseudomembranous colitis, which is quite interesting. And the funny bit about it was I was put in one of the side rooms and they kept sending medical students in to take your history about what's going on. And as a medical student, there's a formulaic way you take your history about presenting complaint, the history of the complaint, any medications, and then they come to your occupation at the end. none of them had twigged that I was a doctor. So they go through this great big long list until they get to the very bottom and then be mortified at the end when they say, well, actually, you're a doctor. But I was sat there in my boxers, not looking particularly great, unshaven, going, well, he probably doesn't look much like a doctor at this point in time. But no, I don't. It was, I guess, I asked my parents and my brothers who came to see me, but I never thought like that. But it's interesting going, naturally you think you could be dead at 27. You know, that if I was in nature, that would have been the case. But bizarrely, I didn't think I'd be speaking about this, but I find death quite a motivating thing, actually, because you look back and say, well, what happened before? What have I delivered on this earth? How have I made a difference? Would I be proud to have that read out at my funeral? What would that look like? I find that quite comforting, actually.
Do you have faith?
No.
But you just...
I'd love to. I genuinely would love to, on the basis that I think it does offer so much, but no, I don't.
Right, let's talk a bit of politics. When did you decide you were a Conservative?
So I suppose I've never been political growing up or anything like that. Nobody in my family's political. At school, I never paid attention to politics or anything like that. I've sort of hinted at it at the start. When I did my year doing anatomy demonstrating, that's when the students were doing their exams, so the election was ongoing. And you started.
So which year is it?
2010.
2010,
2009
right?
to 10.
Yeah.
So David Cameron walking around. Gordon Brown had his spat with in the back of the car and been caught out. And I remember thinking, gosh, they do. You know, they talk to a lot of people. I like talking to people. There's problems in the NHS. I can spot that. I play rugby. I was a Rotarian and did stuff for the community. Actually, maybe I'm a bit interested in politics. So what makes me then decide where I want to go? Well, the positive side from being a Conservative was about aspiration and meritocracy, and as you climb high, you have a responsibility to bring people with you. And then less so going towards the Labour. I mean, in recent years, there was a negative reason about, even the connotation in the 2019 election about for the many, not the few. That, to me, that very statement was divisive. Hang on a second, you're automatically choosing one group over another. That doesn't make sense to me. Why don't we all have an opportunity to move on? And so I guess I fell more towards the Conservative angle from that point. And it was about scratching an itch to say, well, I don't know anyone, how do I get into this? So I signed up and met my local association and went off to an event, and that was it.
So you joined the Conservative Party around 2010?
Yeah, 2010, 2011, something like that. Yeah, so probably a Cameronite type.
At the age of?
God, what do I be? So round about 30, something like that.
Yeah, so that's quite abnormal in the political village, but quite normal to normal.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm always, in all you meet lots of people who are involved in politics who can quote you which election did this and what happened then, and it's slightly above my head. So you do feel it's slightly not inadequate in that sense, but politics around politics, I'm much more about the doing of politics and, trying to solve problems rather than the nuance behind it. Of course, you need that data to back it up. But
the kind of person you have described yourself, I think it's probably a minority. I'm not saying like a tiny minority, but I think most politicians are from that. We used to talk about it when we were growing up, and I knew I was a Conservative or Labour for these reasons. I started delivering leaflets at 10, yes. And I was the youngest councillor at da-da-da. But I think it might, your type of politician may be in a minority. That might not be healthy.
I think you're probably right. That's my experience, that people have had that graded experience back through. There are some who come at it later life. And, all my family say, God, are you mad? What are you doing about it? But then when I say, well, hang on a second, aren't we trying to solve some problems here? And this is a good thing. Because there's so many similarities between being a good local MP and a good local GP. Solving problems, communicating. You're not a master of anything, so you're used to being uncomfortable dealing with experts and people who know much more about you in the opposite. And I find that's quite handy because you're able to then... The biggest kick I get is about explaining things to people and saying, well, this is why it is, how do we solve this problem? Well, then taking that information and feeding it back up the other way. And that's really encouraging and something I really enjoy.
And you have become a campaigning MP, and your campaign is body image. Yes. Talk to us, tell us in your own words, what it is that you're concerned with and why it's important to you.
Yeah, well, if I package it up, the short answer is I'm concerned about the ways social media can influence the way we perceive ourselves, especially if we're looking at digitally warped images. So I grew up wanting, I played a lot of rugby, liked to go to the gym, wanted to look good, and always thought, well, if I was going to be on, Baywatch or something like that, you might be able to get there if you ate the right diet, if you had the right coach, if you had all the money and all the time to train. Nowadays, though, with social media, that doesn't exist. You can make your biceps bigger, your waist really much smaller, just at the click of a button. And for me, that creates this warped world and warped sense of reality that no matter what I do, I can never aspire to get there. No matter how hard I train, no matter what I do, I'm never going to get there. And I think I started to see that in my clinical side with people coming in concerned about it. Two aspects. Often women who were either overtraining or concerned about being too big, but then blokes who were wanting to bulk up and wanting to go to the gym or say, can you prescribe me protein shakes or build-up drinks because I just can't get the gains that I want. And so that's the aspect that's underneath it. And so I started to do the research into, well, there's 1.25 million people with eating disorders and 1 million people using steroids, so there's a big scale of the problem. And then as a politician stepping in, I thought, well, I'm passionate about this. I have no idea how politics works. This is a good lever for me to try to see. It's something I think would make a difference. I think the evidence backs it up that it would. How far can I get driving this through? Thinking I'd fall at the first hurdle where someone would say, no, this is a nonsense idea, or get laughed out the shop, or closed down very immediately. And actually, it's been somewhere in the middle. People say it's a great idea, but there's practical issues about how you resolve it, how you enforce it, what you look like. And working my way through those meetings with all the stakeholders has been fantastic over the last 2 years, because it's only a couple of weeks ago I was meeting with the Norwegian ambassador because they put the same law that I want to put in place over there. And you're saying, well, practically now, how do I do that? Where do I take it? But I never thought I'd be writing in Grazia magazine or meeting. I was very lucky to have James McVeigh from I'm a Celebrity and the Vamps support the campaign. And I never thought that I'd be meeting celebrities and doing this kind of stuff as an MP. But it's how do you generate that? And it's a great learning process for me because I'm a learning by doing kind of person. So that's how it's helped to move the whole campaign into one direction, I guess. So I don't see myself as a campaigning MP, actually. I see it as part of just, that's an interesting part, but all the other stuff you've got to do for your constituents is more important. Making sure they've got the roads. We got a zoo. We're very lucky to have a lot of money go into a zoo and those kind of things. So it's picking issues and problem solving, I guess.
So you've talked about the really positive things that you can do when you're an MP. It's not all easy. Let's talk about constituency surgeries and how and whether you feel safe when conducting them.
Yes, I feel safe. I can see why the risks. I'm very lucky to have a very good team behind me, and people often watching this will think about the MPs, but your team behind you is really important to make sure you've gone through the problems. I guess you step into Parliament and you see lots of people who've been lawyers or experienced trade unionists or whatever dealing with politics. As a GP, you deal with people all the time. That's what your day-to-day bit. So for me, actually, the surgery is one of the places I feel most comfortable in dealing with people, even if you're dealing with the most difficult situations that you can't do much about.
I mean, we lost Sir David Amess, we lost Joe Cox, we could have lost Stephen Timms. It's quite a high rate of murder.
Yes, at attrition. Yeah, of course. And as I said, the team are very good. My police, I cannot fault them locally, have been at beck and call whenever I've needed them to come out. I guess you slightly price it in the sense that you want to be out and about. I live in my constituency. I spend my time there. That's where I walk my dogs. My wife works just over the border. I've always been involved in my community, and I don't want that to change. You just have to be a little bit smarter, and you need your team to tell you, actually, look, that's a little bit, make sure you think about this. But more dealing with the problems is people come to you because they want some help or someone to listen or to make a difference. And that's what I was doing in GP, and that's what hopefully you do now in an MP surgery. Or at least I kid myself that maybe that's the case.
Dr. Luke Evans, thank you very much. I think that's one of our most positive interviews with MPs, and that's good too. It's good to find happy, untraumatised members of Parliament.
Right.
I'm glad that you're happy in your role.
Thank you.
People have fled Ukraine for the safety of neighbouring countries. Over 1 million have gone to Poland. Our reporter Paul Hawkins is there at the train station in Helm. Paul, good to see you. Bring us up to date with the situation there.
Yeah, hi Gloria. The situation here is at Helm, the main station in Helm. There are people coming and going. These people here they've come from Ukraine. We're not sure which part of Ukraine. Could be Lviv, could be Kyiv, and they are making their way out to catch another train onwards to Krakow. There's also a bus outside which is going to Warsaw, and these are the kind of things we're seeing all the time. People coming and going through this station, and in the meantime, for those who have to wait here, there's a kind of, humanitarian aid effort set up here. There are people there serving soup and bread. Over around the corner, there's a kind of first aid facility, etc. And over there in the corner, you can see a lot of people there trying to get more information about. That looks to me like SIM cards and help with their phone. So it's pretty much similar to the registration centre that we were at earlier, but it's kind of been set up in the station. And then if we have a little wander outside, we can show you what is happening as we exit from the station. We can see what's going on. Actually, I'll tell you what, we'll have a quick word with Monica. This is Monica, who's one of the volunteers here. Monica, just how busy has it been today?
So we try to careful, we try to care the people's, but as most of Ukraine help us. And
and no, I was just going to say, and you live in Helm, and you were telling me that there are every other house in Helm now has a Ukrainian family, and it's running out of space.
We don't have any space in Helm. It's very hard to logistic that because Helm is a very little town. It's not many jobs here, not many people as well. And we get the trouble with them because we try to find space for all people who needed the help, and so far it's very difficult. It's so hard to do any results for that.
But today the Polish government announced a big sort of, I think it was worth £1 million worth to help with more aid. Is that going to help?
I think that's called temporary. Because the steel rotated, people is come. After a few days, people is go in the other country on the world as well. So if we have any 2-3 trains, so
it's going to need a lot more, isn't it?
Too many, exactly.
Exactly, too many, exactly. All right, Monica.
We don't have enough space.
Thank you for speaking to us. Really appreciate it. I'll let you get back to your work. But Monica, like a lot of the other volunteers here, Monica's one of the translators that's trying to help with people, trying to facilitate their journey. The Polish people doing so much to try and ease the situation.
You've really brought that situation to life for us, Paul. Thank you. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Do join me tomorrow at 10 to 12, the earlier time for Prime Minister's Question Time. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. For now, it's your weather forecast.
Hello there. Fine and dry for much of the country through this afternoon before cloud thickens with some outbreaks of rain later towards the west. However, the key component of the weather over the next few days will be the wind. It's going to be strong, gale force towards the northwest and cold, particularly across more eastern counties. However, if you can escape the wind through this afternoon, quite pleasant across much of Scotland, central and eastern areas of England. But further west, that nagging wind will bring with it cloud outbreaks of rain. The rain could turn heavy from